Okay, welcome everyone to tonight's OTF Connects presentation, Blogging for Learning with Danica Barker. We do thank you for your time tonight, and I'm going to pass it over to Syria Skirhan, who's the administrator and facilitator of the OTF Connects program at OTF.
Thank you, Louise, and I'm glad you mentioned my title because it's way too long to say. Welcome everyone and to OTF Connects Blogging for Learning. I'm delighted to welcome Danica Baker, who will be facilitating tonight's session. Danica has facilitated several very effective workshops for us in the past, so I'm certainly looking forward to her presentation tonight, and I hope you all are too. It's a nice small group, so I certainly would encourage you all to practice using the mic. And I noticed that Doug is here. Welcome, Doug. Are you here?
Yes, I am. Hi, Syria.
Hi, great to see you here, or hear you. So, Danica, yours.
Hello. So I think we started off this way before. Just to get a sense of where everybody is joining us from tonight, you can take the text tool or the clip art tool just to indicate on the map where you're joining us from. So I am joining you from London. There's me.
I'm coming in from Barrie, and I think I've got a star sort of in the right location.
That looks great. Okay. So I do live in London, Ontario. I actually, oh, and we see there's Ancaster. Okay. And there's Doug down there. Okay, fantastic. I teach in St. Thomas, though, which is a little bit further south, and it's about a half-hour drive from here, at a really lovely high school called Central Elgin Collegiate Institute. And I was just talking to Syria and Louise about the fact that we just got back late Monday night from a trip to Europe. We went to Budapest and Vienna and Prague and Munich. And so we took 42 kids there. We brought 42 kids back. And that's a successful trip, as far as I'm concerned. So yeah, and so I'm suffering a little bit from jet lag, so you'll have to forgive me if I'm a little bit fuzzy or forgetful. I've noticed that quite a bit today. My brain still thinks, right now my brain thinks I should be in bed, but I'm really happy to be with you tonight and to talk to you a little bit about blogging. And so our plan for tonight, this is just a little bit of information about me before we go too much further. So we're going to be looking at moving beyond the basics of blogging a little bit. So we're thinking that you're joining us tonight because you probably already have some experience with blogging. If you don't be concerned about that though. I can see Jennifer is giving some cheers for St. Thomas and London. Very nice. Thank you, Jennifer. So if you don't have a lot of experience with blogging, that's okay. I think you'll still get some useful information out of tonight's session. However, if you do have some experience with blogging, I'm hoping that this will help you move a little bit beyond some of the basics of, this isn't going to be a how-to blog session. We're going to be looking at sort of taking that a little bit further. There are going to be some practical how-to tips along the way. But they're sort of more along the lines of, you know, what do you do once you've sort of got a blog set up or a class blog and so on. So the way that you can get a hold of me is my website is danicabarker.ca, so it's pretty easy. You can find me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is @DanicaBarker. So there are several different ways that you can get a hold of me. And feel free to contact me if you have any questions at all later. And I also, just before we post anything down here, please, if you have any questions at any point at all, because we are a small group tonight, we're kind of cozy here, so please feel totally free to ask a question. And if you're, as Louise was mentioning, if you're more comfortable with raising your hand first, go ahead. I understand that completely. But if you're comfortable just jumping in and asking a question, please feel free to do that too. So one of the things that I'd like to know tonight, just to kind of get a sense of the experience and who's in the room, is to ask you to do a kind of similar thing to what you just did by taking one of the symbols from your toolbar over on the left and indicating which of the different areas fit you. So are you a 7-8 teacher? Do you teach 9 to 10, 11 to 12, or something other? And we might ask you to share if it's something other. So just take a second. You can put your own symbol next to that. And I'll do mine. Okay, great. So a span all over the place. So we've got, let me just see here. So we've got someone teaching 7-8, somebody teaching K-8. We've got several people that sort of fit into the other category. So if you fit into the other category, would you mind either just sharing by microphone or typing in the chat where you fit in there?
Hi, I'm Sandra from Barrie, and I teach young adults. So I checked off grade 11 and 12. That's the subjects that I teach in, but they are not your standard grade 11 and 12 students.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, thanks for sharing that, Sandra. And Doug is teaching teacher candidates at the Faculty of Education. I just finished up teaching a course at the Faculty of Education here in London, and we looked at a lot of this stuff, including blogging. So we were looking at a number of different Web 2.0 things as well. Great. Okay. So I think it's helpful sort of to know that we've got a big span of different age groups here that we're looking at, and hopefully the different things that I'm going to be talking about tonight will be applicable. But again, if you're concerned about anything or you're not sure how you might be able to apply this to the age group that you're teaching, please do feel free to jump in and ask a question. We've got another slide here for you just for polling. So this is going to give you a little bit of experience using the polling tool if you haven't used it before. So I'd just like to know which of the following best describes your experience with blogging. So you can use the polling tool for your answer. So rather than having a check mark or an X, you'll now have multiple choice options. So A means you have absolutely no experience with blogs. B means you read some blogs for interest or for school. C means you've recently created a blogging account. D means you have some experience. And C means you blog regularly. So if you just want to choose the letter that suits you, and I can see them showing up next to your names. Doug Peterson is probably the blogging expert. Okay. And Rebecca, do you see that polling option there? Okay. So, and it looks like to me that we've got quite a big span in terms of experience level as well. So we've got some people with lots of experience blogging, some people who read blogs but don't necessarily blog themselves. And so this is, hopefully there'll be something in here for everybody as well. I don't see anybody with an A next to their name, which means that we don't have anybody who has absolutely no experience. But Rebecca's typed in B, so that's fine, Rebecca. You don't need to worry about putting that in the poll. I can see it. But Louise is giving you some instructions there for how to do that for the future. So nobody who's a complete newbie with blogging, you've at least read it. So if we could see, ooh, look at that paragraph. That's lovely. Nobody who's just recently created a blogging account. So it looks like you either read blogs or you blog yourself, but you're not completely new to it. So that's good to know. All right, so moving on. Here's the agenda for tonight, and I hope that you won't mind if I discuss some literature. I'm doing my master's right now, and so I'm involved in reading literature about these different topics all the time, and so I've come across some stuff that I think is really relevant to what we're going to be talking about tonight, because I find a lot of the time when we're looking at incorporating things like blogging or using Twitter or anything else that's relatively new in the classroom, I think one of the things that administrators and parents are looking for is the rationale for doing it. And so I'm going to approach this not just as a, hey, let's experiment with blogging in the classroom, but I'm going to look at giving you a rationale for it that is based on recent literature. I'm not going to inundate you too heavily with looking at, I'm not assigning any readings, but I'm not going to inundate you too heavily with the literature here. But I want to look at two pieces that were really influential for me for starting or developing a rationale for starting blogging in my classroom. And one of them is a white paper by Henry Jenkins and a number of other authors actually, called Confronting the Challenges of Participatory Culture. And Louise is putting the links to these articles in the chat if you're interested in actually reading them. And they are interesting reading. So I have to read some pretty boring papers right now with my program. So I'm always delighted when I come across, a paper that makes for some fascinating reading. And both of these really appeal to me. So I hope you'll find them interesting as well. And I'll just be giving you sort of the overview of them and what they might have to do with blogging. But if you're interested in reading them later, there are the links in the chat. Then what we're going to do is we're going to move on to looking at incorporating blogging into existing units or lessons that you might have. And the way that I'm going to do that is basically by giving you a kind of case study. So I'm going to talk about how I took an existing unit that I had and how I incorporated blogging and sort of comparing what changed. So what were the literature circles that I used to do? What were they like then and what are they like now? How has blogging changed them? So I hope that by giving you a very specific example of sort of case study, you can see how you might do the same thing. Oh, there's some rubbing against my microphone. You're getting some extra noise. Okay. I'm not sure if I'm just touching things too much. I might be fiddling around too much. So let me know if that continues, okay? All right, so yes, as I was saying, I'm hoping that by doing an actual sort of case study, you can make those connections to the kinds of things that you might already be teaching in the classroom and then thinking about how you could incorporate that. If you do have any questions, though, we can certainly talk about that as well. And then within that section, I'm going to talk about assessment. So how do I anyway assess blogging and commenting? That doesn't mean that that's the way that you would assess it. Okay, I'm glad to know my sound's good now. But I'll have some suggestions for you as well for how you might begin that kind of assessment and evaluation cycle with blogging. And then also I have a piece on digital citizenship. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about that, but I am going to talk about how within the context of blogging, I actually sort of use that to start teaching students about digital citizenship. And then finally, I'm going to talk about management. So I know one of the concerns for me when I first started having my students blogging was how do I manage a whole set of student blogs? So initially when I started to blog, I just had one blog per class, and then I had students commenting within that one blog. As I moved on, I realized that it was kind of important for students to have their own spaces, their own digital spaces. And so they created their own blogs. And but then, of course, that becomes a bit of a management headache. So how do you figure out how to keep track of all of those? So I'm going to show you how I keep track of them. I've used blogging both with my students at the high school level, but I've also used it with my Faculty of Education students, and we do them in two sort of different ways. So I can show you different ways to approach it. Okay, so diving right into a rationale for blogging. I'm going to start off by talking about the Jenkins paper, and then I'm going to talk about Kathleen Blake Yancey's paper, Writing in the 21st Century. And it's nice to see that they're all both quite recent. I know actually if you look at, well, 2006, like that's, 7 years ago now. But in terms of published papers, that's actually pretty recent. So we'll start off with that one. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about with Henry Jenkins' paper, you'll see I'm not going to post a whole bunch of information on each slide, but I wanted to tell you that the Jenkins paper was basically written in response to the findings of the Pew Internet and American Life project. And this study found out a number of different things, but one of the things that it found was that more than 1/2 of all teens have created media content, and roughly 1/3 of teens who use the internet have shared the content they produce. And then the study looks at basically the implications of these findings for educators. And actually, let me just back up for a second. And then the Yancey paper looks at how historical perceptions of writing have changed alongside technology and our understanding of literacy, and basically what that means for people who teach writing. Or actually, she suggests rather than talking about teaching writing, we might want to change the terminology to talking about composing. Okay. So to dive into the Jenkins paper, I created this little graphic to help describe or help illustrate what Jenkins describes as being participatory culture. And this is the kind of culture that our students are engaged in all the time. Now, the degree to which they do this well, that varies, but they are engaged in it. So he defines participatory culture as a culture with relatively low barriers to artistic expression and civic engagement, strong support for creating and sharing one's creations, and then surrounding all of that is some type of informal mentorship where what is known by the most experienced is passed on to novices. So this is the kind of culture that our students are engaged in almost daily to different degrees, and with different degrees of mastery as well. One of the other things, or two of the other things to consider about participatory culture is that this is one where members believe their contributions matter, and they also feel some degree of social connection with one another. Now, whether that's positive or negative, that depends on the situation, but at the very least, they do care about what other people think about what they've created. And so you can see this through the I'm just thinking of examples of things that my students do. I have one student who's really into rapping, and he makes his own rap videos and uploads them to YouTube. He has his own channel, and he's really concerned with, the number of hits that he gets and the kinds of comments he gets on his videos. So he's very much engaged in participatory culture. But you could also think of it in the sense of, even when people post things on Facebook, the number of likes that they get or the comments that they get on their posts. So this is the kind of culture where they feel like their contributions matter, people care about what they have to say, and they care about what they've created, and they develop some sort of social connection as a result of that. So this is the kind of world that our students are engaged in on a regular basis. Do they try to outshock each other in a competitive type of way? Well, I suppose in the types of conversations that I see my students engaging in, not so much, but I suspect that in the types of conversations they might engage in their own private worlds, and I say private in air quotes, on Facebook, they do sometimes probably try to outshock each other in the types of things that they post. Now, I don't know, Doug, you might be referring to my student with his rap videos, but he's pretty much in a different class. He really is quite a talented rapper, so they're not really trying to outshock him, but they do like to certainly comment on the videos that he uploads. And that raises a whole other issue, is the kinds of participatory culture that we may see our students engaging in is not necessarily the type of culture that they're engaging in outside of class time. And so, but we do know that they do it. Okay. Now, participatory culture also takes a number of different forms, and so I created this kind of busy Venn diagram to show this, because I think it's important to see that the different forms all overlap in different ways. So Jenkins describes affiliations as being the types of memberships, both formal and informal, in online communities centered around various forms of media. So we actually just talked about that Facebook is an example of that. And I would say that YouTube is also an example of that, where students are creating different kinds of communities and engaging with each other. They are members of these different online communities. The next one is expressions. So this is producing new creative forms, such as things like digital sampling, mashups, writing fan fiction. These are all things that are quite popular among students, and uploading those and sharing them in creative ways. Collaborative problem solving, so working together in teams, again, in both formal and informal ways to complete tasks and solve problems. So, I mean, even thinking about the way that students might work together in a game like Call of Duty, that they have to work together as a team online to solve a particular problem, but also by doing things like contributing to wikis. There's a lot of wikis in particular that have been created for certain games that are popular among students, but I know students who are really fascinated in particular kind of niche areas, and they are really concerned about maintaining and watching Wikipedia pages on their subject area. And then the fourth form of participatory culture is circulations, which is shaping the flow of media. So doing things like podcasting and blogging. I would say that the type of blogging that a lot of the students that I teach are very much engaged with outside of school would be something like Tumblr, where they're not always creating their own posts, but they're sometimes kind of curating. They're seeing other posts and they're sharing them with their friends. And so that's sort of a combination of both blogging and social networking. But those are the types of participatory culture that our students are engaged in. And the thing that Jenkins is suggesting is not that this is good or bad, he's just saying it is. This is the kind of stuff they're engaged in. Now, as a result of that, this study, there are some potential benefits that they could find by looking at this. So there's a growing body of scholarship that basically suggests potential benefits of these forms of participatory culture. And we talk a lot about the dangers of engaging in social media, and that's certainly there, but Jenkins is looking at what the possibilities are as well. So things like peer-to-peer learning, a changed attitude towards intellectual property, diversification of cultural expression, the development of skills that are actually valued in a modern workplace. So the kinds of things that we talk about like problem solving and creativity and collaboration. And a more empowered concept of citizenship. I'm thinking about, when I first encountered the internet as a teenager, that it was very much one-sided. It was a place where I went to for information about the projects that I was working on for school. But it wasn't something that I could contribute to. So the sense of being an engaged citizen in a digital world, that wasn't something that I had. But my students very much have the sense that they can publish ideas and their voices can be heard all over the world. And that can be something that can definitely have positive benefits for our students. So access to this participatory culture basically functions as a new kind of hidden curriculum. We talk a lot about, in the Faculty of Education course that I teach, about the curriculum that's visible that we plan on teaching versus the hidden curriculum. So these are these things that sort of bubble beneath the surface that the students are learning that aren't part of the formal curriculum. And the kinds of engaging that they do in this participatory culture certainly form that hidden curriculum. Now the problem with that is that some youth will very much succeed in this world, but there are going to be other kids that are left behind as they enter school and the workplace. And some people have argued that children and youth acquire these skills and competencies on their own, but Jenkins is arguing that there's a growing gap here between those students who are engaging in this well and those students who aren't. And so that's something that we need to be concerned with and really look at. And so naturally that's going to lead us to the implications that are there for us as teachers or teachers of teachers. So the participation gap is the one that I was just alluding to, and that's this unequal access that exists to opportunities, experiences, skills, and knowledge that will really prepare our young people for participation in the world of tomorrow that, I mean, we can't even envision yet. So we're not talking in this sense about, access to specific hardware or technology. We're talking more about the participation gap in terms of skills that students have. There's also the transparency problem, and this is really encompassing the challenges that young people face in learning to see clearly the ways that media shape perceptions of our world. I know that as a media studies teacher, my students really struggle. They think that they're very savvy consumers of media, but they do really struggle to see how media is shaping their perceptions. And then the ethics challenge, and this is something that I know colleagues of mine have talked about a lot. So when you're breaking down traditional forms of professional training and socialization, when we're doing this, we're concerned about how we're preparing students for these increasingly more public roles as media makers and community participants. So, as they're uploading these mashups and things like this that they've created, what are the ethical concerns involved here? So, are they giving credit to the original creators of the media that they're using? Talking about things like Creative Commons sources and so on. And so these are new implications for us as teachers that we may not have faced before. Okay. So moving ahead, the other piece that really sort of shaped my rationale for looking at blogging in the classroom was a piece called Writing in the 21st Century by Kathleen Blake Yancey. And one of the things that she looks at is the difference between writing then and writing now. And she says that writing has never really been accorded the same kind of cultural respect or support that reading has. And that's partly because through reading, society could control its citizens, whereas through writing, citizens might actually exercise their own control. Now, reading, partially because it had its central location in family life in the church, it tended to produce feelings of intimacy and warmth, but writing, on the other hand, was often associated with things that were unpleasant. So things like test taking or, writing letters to people that were far away that you missed. And so there's a real sort of ambivalence historically towards writing, whereas reading may have had more positive connotations. Now, writing now has changed quite a bit in large part due to technology. So thanks to Web 2.0, Yancey writes, opportunities for composing abound on MySpace and Facebook and Google Docs and multiple blogs and platforms, and on national media sites where writers upload photos and descriptions, videos, and personal accounts, where they are both recipients and creators of our news. So if I sort of think back to when I was talking about what the internet was like when I first started looking at it as a student in high school, those opportunities for composing publicly weren't available to me, but they are now. What she's talking about in particular is also the change in audience. So writers are everywhere, but so too are audiences. So students have always, had the opportunity to write, but what's really changed is their ability now to publish to a wide audience of, people just beyond their classroom teacher or beyond their peers in the classroom. Now, of course, this leads to challenges for us as well as teachers. So some of the challenges that we face now, according to Yancey, are how do we develop new models of composing that acknowledge these technological changes? How do we design a new curriculum that supports these models? And then finally, how do we create new pedagogies that enact this curriculum? And I certainly don't intend to solve any of those problems tonight. It's just that those challenges that she posed when I was reading them, one of the ways that I was thinking about approaching this for myself as a teacher was looking at blogging. So if we're going to incorporate blogging the question to me was, what could blogging do that conventional writing couldn't do as well? So this is where I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, kind of give you a case study, so how I incorporated blogging into my teaching. So a little bit of backstory. I was a classroom teacher, and then I spent a year at the board office as a consultant. And so I was working with a number of different teachers. And as I was working with them and, basically incorporating all of the great ideas into things that I wanted to try in the classroom, blogging was one of those things that I wanted to do, but I wasn't quite sure what it could do that traditional writing couldn't accomplish. And so it took a little bit of experimenting for me to figure that out when I got back to the classroom. So prior to my experience with blogging, I used to do literature circles with my students. So if you're not totally familiar with literature circles, the way that they work in my experience is my students are reading books, and they are generally, in this case, books that they have chosen. And they get together on a regular basis to talk to other students in class who are reading the same book that they are. And those vary depending on the age group, sort of in terms of the structure and the roles and so on, but that's the basic idea. So students would read books, they'd have meetings, and then the next day they usually had to do some sort of application exercise. And so that often ended up being an in-class journal where they would synthesize the ideas that they had discussed in writing, and they would then hand that journal in to me, and I would mark it. And the idea was that these journals would help them prepare for some sort of final project down the road later, like an essay. But their collaboration that was happening in the literature circle meetings, that basically ended after the meeting. So they were doing this great collaboration, but then the next day it was just this one-to-one communication with me. And it also meant that they didn't get to read the work of their peers. So they didn't really get to find out what the discussions were happening, or what the discussions were that were happening in the other groups, where students were maybe reading a different book than they were. So the Yancey article basically made me think about how the writing that I was assigning them wasn't really authentic. They were writing it in a sort of an artificial way. They weren't writing to learn, or they weren't really writing to communicate. They were writing as an assessment piece for me. And what I really wanted their writing to be was a way to, communicate and share their ideas with other people and share it with their peers. And I mean, they weren't, a lot of times the real reason that they were writing was just to get a mark from me. They weren't writing for an authentic purpose. And so what I mean by an authentic purpose is, why do we write outside of the classroom, in our real everyday lives? What are our purposes for writing? And journaling and diary writing and that sort of thing certainly serves a really useful purpose. But that wasn't really the type of purpose that I was trying to get at with this. It was just, that was what I'd always done. And so I was thinking that maybe blogging would actually be, this would be a good place to actually incorporate blogging in a way that wouldn't feel like too much of an add-on to what I was already doing. So I was already having, a reflective component to this unit. So the change that I made was, rather than make it just a one-to-one correspondence between myself and the student, I made it a correspondence between my students in the entire class. Okay. So in order to really dig into this, one of the things that I found that I needed to do was, just as I've given you a rationale for why I think blogging is something that's valuable, I needed to give the students a rationale. Initially, when I thought about blogging, I thought that my students would be on board right away, and that I wouldn't have to give them a rationale because we were using technology and they could get to do their work on the computer. Not just on the computer, but they got to do it online, so why would they, balk at that? But I had a lot of students who were very skeptical about trying new things. They were really just comfortable with doing what they'd always done because that's how they were successful in class before. So they were really concerned about blogging, and they wanted to know, well, why do you want me to blog? And I thought that was actually a very valid question. So one of the things that I've done is I've just talked to them about how what is a blog and how it has evolved from the term weblog, and that it's an online journal or diary. And while some people do blog about very personal or private things, what distinguishes it from a traditional diary or a journal is that it's at least semi-public, and it usually allows other people to comment. And so we would go into a little bit more detail about looking at the difference between a blog and a private journal. One of the other things that we would do is I would show students examples of different blogs, and so they might be blogs that previous students had written, but I've also showed them, examples of my own blogging that I've done, so that they get a sense of what that looks like and what the level of language is that you might find in a blog, and how that may vary depending on the audience and purpose that the blog is written for. But I mean, the real distinguishing factors are that it's at least semi-public, and that it does usually allow for other people to comment, so that it becomes more of a dialogue rather than a final piece that's submitted and you just sort of put a mark on it and hand it back. That dialogue component was important. So one of the things that I've gotten here, and I'm hoping Louise can add the links for you in the chat, because, oh, she's so fast, because I'd actually like to just do a little web tour with you and show you. I'm just trying to highlight the link here. Hope I've got this right. Just one second. Okay. I'd like to actually show you, I've given you a link to 2 different handouts that I've actually used, and you are welcome to download them and modify them if they suit your purposes. So just open up the web tour, and hopefully it'll work. If it doesn't, it's not a big deal. Nope, that first one is not working. Let me just see here. Let me try it one more time. It's a bit fiddly. I don't know, Louise, is there an easier way to sort of copy the link rather than for me to try to highlight it?
Yep, I think you are having a little bit of trouble, but everyone, if you can give me a green check mark if you see the scribed page, because I do see it, Danica. This might be our little issue where you don't see it, but everyone else does. Okay, Doug sees it. All right, Jennifer, Kyle, Irene. Okay, so Danica, what I suggest for you is that you just open it in a regular browser link so that you can kind of follow along. But I'm also going to suggest
not a problem.
First, you could try just switching back to the whiteboard and then going back into it.
Trying one more time. No, it's still coming up telling me.
Okay, so I see it, but
that's okay.
Error.
I remember.
Okay. All right, so everybody should have it up. You see it all right, Sandra?
I see at the very top of the page it says scribed, and there's a space for URL and there's nothing in there. Underneath it, it says that the document reflective blog post has been deleted.
That's the message that I'm getting too.
So the page I'm seeing has other things on it, but not.
Oh, so the other stuff isn't. Okay, all right. Thanks, Sandra, for clarifying that for us. Okay, Danica. So is it possible that your link has been what you were linking to has been moved?
It's showing up okay actually when I opened it in the browser. So let me just try one more thing here.
Okay.
No, it's still giving me that it's been deleted, but I could try to upload another one later, because when I clicked on the link, it opens all right in my browser. It's just not showing up so well in the web tour.
Yeah, it's okay in my browser too. What you could suggest, everyone, if you click on the link that's in the chat, it will just open it where you can see it in your own browser window. And if you get a little lost looking for the Blackboard interface, you'll find it as a little purple circle down at the bottom of your screen or your dock if you're on a Mac.
Perfect. Okay, so if you are looking at that, we won't spend a whole lot of time here, so don't be too concerned if you're not actually able to open it right now. The link should work, though, if you open it somewhere else. This is a handout that I actually give students. Now, this one is specific to, you'll see, the play Hamlet by Shakespeare. But that doesn't really matter. So you can see the instructions that I give the students are pretty generic, and they could be transferred to another context. One of the things that you'll also see though down here is I've given a rationale for why I would like students to blog instead of write in a private journal. So one of the things that I said to them is that public writing requires a different level of thought. When you know that somebody else will read your writing, you tend to think about it in a different way. You are more careful to make good word choices and explain your thoughts clearly. It also allows for dialogue because others can comment on your work. Don't think of a blog as a traditional published piece of writing. When you publish a piece of writing, it's finished, but when you blog, you can keep adding, exploring, and changing ideas. You can also add links to other interesting sites, upload images, music, and video. Just make sure you have permission to do so. And so that criteria I thought was important to give the students, that they understand why I would like them to actually do this. And then incorporated within here as well is the criteria that I have for blogging. So for a level 4, my students needed to, and this was in while we were studying Hamlet, post at least twice a week. Their posts needed to have an effective title. They needed to have an appropriate image that enhanced the post, Creative Commons or their own work. They needed to use hyperlinks for referencing, clear tags, 3+ paragraphs.
We're having a problem with the sound. I can't hear her.
Yes, I noticed some lagging there too. Danica, do you want to try again?
Text to text, text to self, and text to world connections.
Danica, sorry, you know what? Your sound is cutting out even though we're not seeing any of the indicators there. Do you want to flip your mic off and then turn it back on again and see if that helps?
I think what happens is that as Danica changes pages, we can hear her if we're on the same page that she's on, but if we're on the other page or back here to our conversation, I don't know what to call this, we can't hear her. That's my guess.
Okay, we see our sound lagging symbol there for Danica. So what she's hearing from us is maybe just going to catch up with her in a second, and then she'll turn her mic back on, and hopefully we'll be all right. Okay, everyone. So when we have internet bandwidth issues, occasionally people will be bumped from the session. If it's our facilitator that gets bumped from the session, they panic and she'll be back really, really, really quick. What I'm going to suggest that everyone does right now, you can continue reading. I actually just took a screenshot of Danica's reflective blog post and put it on the screen here. But if you'd like to move ahead to the second link that's in the chat and take a peek at the 2-day lesson plan that Danica's prepared, we'll get a little ahead of her while she logs back in, and you can maybe take a look at that and see if there's any spots that you think of how that might work in your classroom, or if you have any questions that we can pose to her as soon as she gets back in. Thanks, everybody. Let me just follow up with you there, Kyla. I'm going to go and click on the link and see what happens when I try and download it. Okay, so I got a pop-up box that said download this document. Are you getting at least that far?
No, I'm not getting that part.
Okay, so but when you clicked on the link in the chat, you did get a browser window that opened with the Scribed website, and you were able to see the document?
Oh, I see the document, but I opened a separate window for it.
Okay, that's all right. And so at the top of that screen, do you see a button that's orange that says download? Upper left-hand corner? Upper left. Oh, upper left. Because over on the right-hand menu, there's another big button that says download or print, but I think that's for a different set of blog posts that are there, whereas the actual blog post we're looking at, the download button is the upper left corner.
Okay.
Oh, and Rebecca got bumped out, and now she's back.
Okay, I got it working.
You got it working? Okay, great. Okay, I can see Rebecca's typing a comment there. If everyone can just bear with me just a tiny little bit, I'm going to try and tweet Danica and see if perhaps her handheld device isn't having the same difficulties. Sorry if you're picking up any background noise in my house.
Thank you everyone for your patience tonight.
This is kind of funny. Doug, I'm sure that you're reminiscing about your experience as an OTF Connect facilitator when the power went out at your house. Or in this case, your daughter says, okay, here, I've just heard from Danica. All right, so she's letting me know she cannot get back in, so I am going to just try and connect with her a little bit more and see if we can save her. Poor girl, she's no doubt having some complete freakouts right now. But she has email, so let's see.
Yes, she just emailed me also to say that she can't get back into the room. I appreciate everybody's patience here tonight. We have been having difficulties with Blackboard platform over the last 2 weeks, and we took advantage of the March break to iron out all the little issues, but obviously they're not. So please bear with us tonight, and hopefully we can get Danica back, and she can continue with her presentation. And possibly while Louise is trying to help Danica, you can take the mic and share your experiences and how you use blogging in the classroom. So I'll pass the mic on to anyone that wants to share their ideas. I'd appreciate it. Maybe Doug can share his experience.
His experience blogging as opposed to getting knocked out of sessions.
Yes, I was going to clarify. Hopefully his blogging experience, because he is quite an avid blogger. But if he wants to share his experience of being left out in the dark, go ahead, Doug.
It's kind of freaky when you're doing one of these things and the power goes out. I can imagine that Danica is trying everything that she possibly can to get back with us.
Yes, Jennifer, you're not the only lucky person.
Yes, I just noticed your comment there too, Jennifer. Yes, no, it happens to all of us. So Danica has emailed again. I provided her with a fresh link. Hopefully that's going to work. Yay! She's here! All right, lots of loud applause, everyone. Okay, Danica, I'm sure that you're feeling a tad rattled, so don't worry. People were encouraged to just share their comments and take a break and maybe take a quick peek ahead at your 2-day lesson. So thank you heaps and heaps. And all right, so continue on where you were.
Okay, I really sincerely hope I don't cut out again, guys. I will definitely not try the web tour again tonight. I'm not sure what's going on, gremlins, something like that. So, yeah, Chipmunk, okay. Are you getting me as Chipmunk Danica right now? Yeah. Okay. All right. Louise says it's fine. You guys let me know if we need to stop. Okay. So you've looked ahead. So you looked at the 2-day lesson. So the 2-day lesson that I posted, oh, okay, thanks, Jennifer, was specifically designed for a class, a different class that was using blogging. And that 2-day lesson might be helpful for you if you're trying to get students set up on the Blogger platform, which is the one that Google uses. And so it gives very sort of step-by-step instructions for how to get students set up with that. And it also includes a self-evaluation rubric that I've used with students before as well. So the idea behind that is students at the end of a specific chunk of time would use that rubric to evaluate their own blog posts, and then we would have a little discussion about it together. So I hope those resources are going to be useful for you. Obviously, depending on the age of the students that you're teaching and what you're planning on using blogging for, you would modify those different assignments and hand out some rubrics for them. So now I'm trying to click to move to the next page.
Okay, I'll move ahead for you then.
It's not letting me. Okay, thank you. Oh boy. Okay, so the thing that I wanted to talk to you about was what actually made blogging effective for my students. And hey, it's not my Mac. And what it ended up coming down to was applying the kinds of 21st century skills that we want students to develop. And blogging really worked well for that. Okay, I can click on the slides now, seems to be fine. One of the really big things that came across right away is that it gave students an authentic audience for sharing and comparing their ideas. So, a lot of times I think students hand in assignments and they sort of wonder, like, how did you approach this assignment? Well, with something like blogging, the students could see everything that their peers had done, and so they had that way to compare their ideas with each other. So they weren't just sharing their ideas and getting the feedback from the teacher, but they were actually sharing ideas and getting the feedback from the people that they really care about, who are their peers. So again, remember in the Jenkins paper, one of the things he talked about was that in participatory culture, students really do have or young people have this sense that what they're sharing online matters, and they care about getting feedback from their peers. So this was just actually a screenshot of a blog post that was done by one of my students. You could see back in 2010 when this was still fairly new to me. And that was one of the things that I was discovering, is that the audience of their peers, that really mattered to my students. And so that made that valuable. Also, commenting was something that was huge that I didn't really consider before would be important for students. So you can see here that there's one student's blog post, and Brian has commented on this, and he said he's agreed, but then he started pointing out some additional ideas that the other students he might not have considered before. So he says, he's talking about Ophelia here when they were blogging about Hamlet. And then Nithra replied as well, but then she sort of had, she was pointing out things that Mark had pointed out that she hadn't considered before. So it's kind of cool how that commenting creates both a dialogue for the students, but also for me as a teacher, I can see how their ideas have changed and altered as a result of considering the ideas of their peers. And that's the kind of really cool stuff that you don't always get to have the concrete evidence of as a teacher. Also in the commenting, one of the things that I saw from my students is that they were engaging in risk-taking in a positive way. So the students who were commenting, it's interesting, they wouldn't necessarily discuss those ideas with those people in a face-to-face context in class, but when they were online, they were really more engaging with just the ideas that the students were presenting. And so somehow that made them feel freer to kind of open up and share ideas that they wouldn't have shared before. And of course, whenever I say that they are taking risks online, the concern is, well, what kind of risks are they taking? the negative risks that we sometimes see happening in online culture outside of school weren't there in the classroom because they weren't anonymous. I mean, there was a certain kind of anonymity provided by the fact that they could comment without having to say it out loud to the person's face. But they also wouldn't take those negative risks because they knew that I knew who they were, and they couldn't hide behind a fake identity. So that actually led to a lot of positive risk-taking. And this extending the conversation was something that was really important, I think, as well, that I hadn't considered before. One of the other things that I saw through blogging was increased confidence in their own writing. Because it's one thing if I tell them, you know, no, I'm really proud of you. I can really see that your writing has grown over time. And I'm not going to say that that doesn't matter to the students. It does. But it also really matters when they can kind of look back at a body of work that they've created over a semester or in some cases over a year. So this is a picture from a student's blog from back in 2010 that was really interesting because she was in my first class where I had done blogging. And I actually had her all year, so I had her in first semester and second semester in classes where we did blogging. And she was, and you can actually see in her posts, at first she was completely against blogging because she didn't understand why I was asking them to do it. And she was very self-conscious about her own writing. But by the end of the course, she actually wrote this post about how she appreciated the opportunity to express herself and how she can see that she's grown in time and in her confidence as a writer, which was something that was really cool to see. And that's partially due to the fact that she was getting feedback from her peers. So she was really hard on herself, but then she found that, you know, her peers were actually being very supportive of the things that she was talking about and the ideas she was sharing. And that actually encouraged her to write more. One of the other things that was, a question here from Doug. Do you treat the blog like a portfolio and have students highlight their best work? Yes, it depended on the class. So in this class that this particular student was in, this was for my media class where blogging was something that the students did throughout the course. Whereas in some of my other classes, the students just blog for a particular unit. And I've often asked them to go back through their blog posts and highlight what they think is their best post and why. And so they blog about a blog, so it becomes a meta post, I guess you would say. And that was something that I came up with the idea with probably after Alicia's post, where she was writing about her experience of blogging overall. Because that's something, it makes their growth really visible. Like they can really clearly see that, and they can see the difference between what their posts were like when they started and what they're like now. So I didn't initially plan on it being a kind of portfolio, but that is what it became in many of my classes. The other thing that became a really powerful tool in my students' blog posts were their tags. So students were tagging their posts with keywords, and that actually helped other students sort through blog posts and help find kind of common themes or subject areas that might be similar to things that they were writing about. So what I've got sort of circled and highlighted here are the tags at the bottom of one individual blog post. And then in the particular platform that I used, I could sort all of my students' tags that were used by the students on this site. And I'm going to talk a little bit later, not too much later, but a little bit later about the different platforms that I have used for blogging. Rebecca, I did have a couple of the things I generated for the students. So later on I said, let's just, create a clear tag for the title of the book, for example, so that we didn't have some people writing pie and some people writing life of pie and that sort of thing. But for other ones, I just had the students generate them on their own. And sometimes when they realized that, for example, there might be variations on a tag, they would put in both of them. So they kind of came up with that on their own. I didn't have to really worry about that. But you can do that too. You can come up with the tags for them and ask them to tag their posts in a specific way, depending on what kind of information you're trying to sort. What I was hoping for, what I was looking for my students with this particular example that you're seeing on the screen is this was for my Literature Circle blogs. And so I wanted them to be able to go back through their posts at the end and develop ideas for their essay. And so the tags help them sort ideas for their essay down the road. So the cool thing is you can see just on the right here that there are 3 posts with the tag tradition. And those are all different students. And so some of them might be surprised that somebody else wrote about that as well. So I hope that answers your question, Rebecca. Now, and of course, one of the things that just organically comes up as part of this is how are we going to deal with issues of digital citizenship? And in a way, the kinds of blogging that I was doing in my class at first was a kind of a training wheel kind of setup. And Louise is saying here, if they're curating some of the online resources they're researching ideas from, some tags might be suggested to them. Yes, exactly. Exactly, Louise. The site that I used for blogging with a lot of my students was Ning, which is a social networking site that you can create and run yourself. And you can ensure that it is either closed so that it's only open to the people that you've invited and they can only see the material if they log on, or you can keep it completely open. And so one of the things that I liked about that was initially when I started off blogging, we kept it closed, so we were sort of putting on the training wheels. And then we talked about what we would need to do to take the training wheels off. So if you look, Kyla, if you look above what you've just posted, Louise has posted the link for Ning. Now the one thing that I've done presentations on Ning before, and I'm not going to talk too much about it, but I will say that one of the things was that initially Ning was free, and now there are sort of different levels, so it's not completely free anymore. But there are other sites that you can use that are similar to Ning. But I've also used with other classes, we've just used Blogger, which is totally open and totally free, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. And you can still use tags on Blogger and everything else. But one of the things we talked about was if we were going to be, or EduBlogger, exactly, Louise. There are lots of platforms for blogging out there. If we're going to be posting information online, what are some of the things that we need to be concerned about? And you'll be surprised, or maybe you won't be, but the students know. I mean, they know the kinds of interactions that they've had online that have been positive and negative. So sometimes what we do is we just start off as a class and we go, think about some of the positive and negative experiences you've had online. How did they make you feel? How did you react to them? And that sort of thing. And so by taking that information, then one of the things that we did is we basically developed an anchor chart for the classroom. And so we brainstormed guidelines for posting information online. And then I actually had students share those guidelines as their first kind of practice blog post. And then we created that as an anchor chart, so it was always up in the room so that students had to think about that criteria before they actually posted. So I think I've got, these are actually the ideas that my students came up with in one of my classes. So never post personal information, so things like your address, your phone number, and your email. Use first name and last name initial, or first name and last initial only. Not using other people's work without permission. This was a big one that they came up with, was that they shouldn't say something online that they wouldn't say to a person's face. Now, we had some discussion in our own class about, well, what if, you know, somebody's mean and they would just say something mean to a person's face? And I mean, obviously that's a discussion that you have with your students, but my students understood that that's what it meant. Okay, so that if you are not comfortable saying it to somebody's face, then you should probably evaluate whether or not that's something that you would post online. And never post something that they came up with the grandmother thing. So they said never post something that you wouldn't want your grandmother or a future boss to see, because a couple kids said, well, my grandmother is pretty crazy, so I wouldn't mind. So anyway, so we threw in the future boss part as well. But then the other thing was be supportive and be constructive, and that was the bottom line. So when we were talking about interacting with each other online, the first question that we asked ourselves was, is what I'm saying supportive? Is what I'm saying constructive? So is it furthering the conversation? Is it furthering it in a positive, polite way? And I mean, even though a lot of the stuff that we're doing is digital and online, as Louise was mentioning, having that like just paper poster in the classroom is something that's really helpful that you can always draw your students' attention to. I also do things like whenever we've got, a class website or something like that, that criteria is also posted on there as well. So students have lots of reminders. And I mean, I think the bottom line is that when you're dealing with these sorts of issues, you need to remember that while the technology augments the way that the behavior is portrayed or that we demonstrated, it is still primarily about a behavior, not about the technology. And so if certain issues came up that we needed to talk about, we dealt with the behavior, not the fact that it was on a piece of technology. But in my classes, again, because the discussions that they were having, they had to stand behind their own name that they were posting it. We really didn't have any issues of cyberbullying or anything like that. And I think that that's a really good way, and that's not to say that they're not going to do it outside of class, but I think teaching them and giving them opportunities to engage with each other online in positive and constructive ways is a good first step for them to then start incorporating that outside of the classroom. Now, this is where we get into some of the sort of nitpicky, very sort of practical how-tos. And so a lot of this is more sort of based on ideas here, but I did want to give you some practical stuff that can become an issue, because in the one handout that I've given you a link to, it's specifically designed for using Blogger as a set of class blogs. And with my students at Althouse, so that's the Faculty of Education here in London, they used Blogger primarily as their platform. There are plenty of different platforms that you can use. The reason why I like Blogger personally is because many students already have Gmail or Google or YouTube accounts, and so they've basically already got access to Blogger. They don't have to create new passwords, they don't have to create new email, and a lot of that stuff that's sort of management issues that can be kind of a headache. Having one uniform platform so that all of the students are using the same platform, it makes it easy for them to comment, and it makes it easy for them to share their ideas. And actually, let me just skip ahead a bit. I'll come back to that one because that's what I'm saying on here. For me personally, Blogger is the easiest one that I've encountered. But again, there are so many out there. I've also used Tumblr before. I've used EduBlogs. I use WordPress for myself when I'm blogging. But just for me, when I was setting up student blogs, when I wasn't using the name, the social network, I found using Blogger was a pretty simple and straightforward one. A lot of this information, though, is transferable to other blogging platforms, so don't be too concerned about that. It's just that one of the other added bonuses from a management point of view is that it's really easy to add just Blogger blogs to Google Reader. And if that just sounded completely incomprehensible, don't worry, bear with me. I'll talk about it in a minute. Louise is asking me about the bad news, but what? There was bad
unfortunately, you might have been in a bit of a European hole, Danica. Google is ditching Google Reader in June, or July 1st, I think.
I was.
It's going to be gone. I know.
Okay.
That changes everything. No, don't worry about it. My gosh, March break, 42 teenagers, we understand.
Well, I mean, it doesn't really matter because there are lots of other different types of readers that you can use out there. One of the ones that I really like that hopefully hasn't made an announcement about going away last week is Feedly. So I don't know if you want to do a little bit of scrambling there, Louise, and post a link to Feedly. But Feedly is a very nice tool for grouping all of the different blogs that you might be reading together and figuring out which ones you've read, which ones you haven't read, and which ones are new. So bye-bye, Google Reader. That won't affect me, though, because Google Reader and Feedly link together, and so all of my subscriptions that are in Google Reader are already in Feedly. So if that's something that you're concerned about, there are other alternatives out there for you. So let me just back up a little bit here. Perfect. Thank you, Louise. One of the things, and you might want to come back to this later, and maybe Louise as well, if you could post this link. I'm not going to try and go to it though. This is something that for doing a little bit of reading later. One of the things that I found from sort of digital citizenship standpoint is I love Blogger for its simplicity, but one of the things I don't love too much about it is the fact that it has at the top of the blogs a next blog button, and it will just take you to a random blog, and sometimes they're not school appropriate, but there is a way to get rid of that next blog thing at the top of Blogger. So if you are interested in using Blogger with your students and you're concerned about that, Louise has posted the link. It's actually on Will Richardson's old blog, but the information on there is still relevant for how to edit the HTML code within the template. And that sounds complicated, but it's actually quite simple if you follow the instructions. Because once you're in your dashboard, you can open the template and you can paste the text into something like OpenOffice and follow Will's instructions for getting rid of the next blog header. It's actually pretty straightforward, even though it may sound like you're supposed to be a computer programmer. You don't actually have to be. So that's just something you might want to come back to a little bit later if you're concerned about that header in Blogger. But like I said, if you don't like Blogger, there are other platforms that you can use, like we mentioned, like EduBlogger or EduBlogs. Okay, so this is, of course, I sent Louise and Syria these slides before March break and before Google announced this, but I'm still going to sort of go over some of the instructions here, because even if you use another platform like Feedly, the instructions are going to be pretty similar and pretty transferable. So all you really need to know in order to subscribe to all of the different blogs, no, that's okay, don't worry about it, Louise. All you need to know is the blog's URL. So when I set this up with my students, I let them create their blogs, and then all they had to do was send me their URL so that I could subscribe to it. And again, whatever platform you want to use to subscribe is great. So this goes over it in Google Reader, but it's basically the same in any other thing like Feedly. You paste in the URL wherever you have the option to subscribe to it. And what I often do is I will put all of their blogs into one folder because I'm following so many different ones. And so you can sort of see this is a screenshot of my blogs from Althouse. And so I had all of those students' blogs in one folder. And then all I have to do is when I'm looking at my reader, whether it's Google Reader or Feedly, is it will highlight for me when students have posted something new, and it will show me which ones I've already read. And so that's really, really helpful from a management point of view, because otherwise what I would be doing is I would have to have, my list of all the different URLs for the different blogs, and I would have to individually click on all of them and check and see when students have posted something new. So rather than doing that, I'll use a subscription tool, subscribe to the blogs, and then I just have to open up my subscription tool and I can see all of those blogs in one place, and I can see when they posted something new. Is there much difference in using a blog in Moodle? That's a good question, Sandra. I am familiar with Moodle, but I haven't actually used Moodle myself. So I can't pretend to know about what the difference would be in using a blog in Moodle. I think, and maybe one of you on here could correct me, I think there are probably not quite as many features. If there's blogging in Moodle, it might not have as many features as a sort of standalone blog. Can anybody confirm or deny that? I think Louise is typing. Louise is checking. She is looking into it. Thank you, Louise. And so that's why I've sort of used, Sandra, what you're talking about is having basically a learning management system and blogging within Moodle. So Rebecca, Moodle is a learning management system. And so if you think about, if you've ever done a course online and used something like Blackboard or used something like, I can't think of the other ones right now, but they have their own sort of tools set up within them, and they're each a little bit different. So Doug is asking about the blogging feature in Desire to Learn. I also teach online, and the platform that we use, Desire to Learn, has a blogging feature within it. But I didn't actually use it with my online students because at the time anyway, and I know they've made some changes, it didn't have a whole lot of functionality, and it wasn't something that was particularly useful. I mean, the students couldn't embed, they couldn't use HTML or anything like that within it. So even though I was using Desire to Learn with my students, we had a separate site that we used for blogging, Doug. But I mean, the thing is, with blogging within a learning management system, one of the problems that solves is having to go to several different sites. And so that's something to think about. You know, do you want to give up, because sometimes you have to give up a little bit of the functionality if you want to blog within one site, or are you willing to do a little bit more work in terms of the management side of things and use a subscription tool like Feedly to manage your different blogs? So that's sort of a personal choice, and I have done both. And they both worked out well, actually. I don't mind opening up Google Reader or Feedly at all to actually check my students' blogs. Now, one of the things that this won't be as relevant now is actually that you could create a bundle. And so what I've actually done is within my own class website is I have a bundle where students can access all of the blogs just by clicking on one link. So that if they didn't want to use a subscription tool like Google Reader or Feedly, they didn't have to. But that's another option as well. So I think you're also setting students up with additional tools. If they've already got, you know, if they're already using Blogger, then why not get them to subscribe to different blogs using a tool like Feedly, so that what they're used to doing is rather than going to all the individual links on their blogs, is actually just opening up their reader, and then they can check and see if their classmates have posted anything new. Okay, so I'll back up a little bit. So I sort of glossed over some stuff, but then I ended up having to gloss over it anyway, thanks to Google's unhappy announcement. And but that actually ended up working out okay since I got booted out for a few minutes. So we've actually got a little bit of time left, and I really thank you guys for popping in your questions as you were asking things. And certainly feel free to, if you want to contact me on Twitter, or if you want to email me, and there is information on my class blog about blogging. But we've also got some time too if you have some questions. So Louise has been looking into the question about Moodle, and she's saying that the basic features of commenting and viewing drafts are available in a Moodle blog. So the thing that I was thinking that might not be there would be the tagging feature, which is something that I find, you know, particularly useful. But that doesn't mean that you wouldn't get the benefit of, you know, blogging and commenting and beginning those conversations. So if you do use Moodle, or you have the ability to use Moodle within your school, then you do have that there. Or if you use Desire to Learn, there is a blogging platform set up within there. So it just depends on, you know, how much functionality you actually want to. Oh, and you can tag in Moodle, so there you go. It just sort of depends on your comfort level, what different platforms you're comfortable using, and what you'd like to do. And then sort of picking the platform that works best for you. But in terms of the ideas about, you know, what the purpose of blogging is, and oh, perfect. There's some slides there about blogging in Moodle. So check out that link if you use Moodle and you're interested in blogging within Moodle. But the theory is still the same in terms of, you know, what publishing for an authentic audience and beginning a dialogue rather than handing in, you know, a final published piece of work that never gets discussed again, and getting students to think of themselves as not just consumers of media but also creators of it in a very positive way. So are there any other questions or comments or things that people want to share, maybe about their own experiences with blogging or other resources that they have? Because I know there's a lot of wealth of experience within our digital room here. And if not, that's okay too, because I always like to make sure that I begin and end on time, and we've got about 5 minutes left, so that's looking about right to me. So Louise, is there anything that you want to talk about or add? Oh, Sandra's got a question here. I didn't give enough wait time. You have to give even more wait time when you're working in an online format. So Sandra's saying she's thinking about the prompts for blogs. Do you ever pose questions? Yes, I do. With my media class, I tried to encourage them to make connections to things that we have been talking about in class, but sometimes they're stuck with writer's block, and so I would give them suggestions. With my literature circle blogs, I did give them prompts. I would usually give them 4 different ones and they could choose, and those prompts were based on the discussions that I heard in their literature circle group. So I would come around as they were talking, I'd jot down things that they were talking about, and then the next day when I posted their prompts, they were actually based on their own discussions, so that they knew that there would be, you know, a real link between the discussions they were having and then what they were going to be writing about the next day. So good question, Sandra. A science blog and other than current events. Well, I think one of the things that blogs can be really great for is critical thinking and metacognition. And so there are a bunch of different things that I'm just thinking off the top of my head that you could do. One of them could just be about sort of thinking about reflecting on what they've learned and what they didn't know before but they now know, and maybe making, another thing that blogging is really good for is making connections between what they're learning about in class and the outside world. And so looking at sort of making connections between their own lives and posting links. Yeah, what are they curious about next? So what sort of new questions does this raise for them? Exactly, Jennifer. So anything inquiry-based would work. So getting them to start asking questions, getting them to sort of take what they've been learning about in class and channeling that into their own interests. And that's something that I saw a lot of, especially in their media blogs, because they may not have been specifically interested in the content that we were looking at in class, but then they were taking those ideas and applying it to the things that they were interested in. Oh, good question, Mark. Yes, this webinar is being recorded, and so you will be able to check it out later. And I think Louise will be posting the information about how you can access it. I'm sure you were having technical difficulties. If you do watch the recorded session, you will notice that I had technical difficulties too, so I disappeared for a little bit partway through. So no worries, you'll still be able to get this information. Now, I realize that Jennifer's just writing here that her students blogged about Chris Hatfield, a Chris Hatfield tweet that they were curious about. That's really interesting. So, and then Rebecca's asking me to describe my media blog. If you actually go to, I'm thinking here, if you go to my website, you might be able to still get to it. But just to quickly describe it, I use Ning again. So we had a social network site, and they had their own blogs within that. And for my media class, we were studying a number of different things, and they had to blog once a week. So for example, we might be talking about Creative Commons licensing, or we might be talking about mashups. And then I would ask them to write about something that they could make a connection to in their own life. So if we were talking about the ethics of mashups in the classroom, one of the things that they could do to extend that was find an example of a mashup online. They could then post that, and they could discuss whether or not they think that the creators were exercising good ethics in the way that they gave credit to the original creators of the material that they used. And so, yeah, so my media blog wasn't necessarily a blog about what was going on in the media. That was my students each had their own individual blogs for my media class, and they shared ideas with each other. And what we did actually with that site is we actually paired up that class with another class that was also studying media but looking at different things. And so it was kind of interesting how they were able to then comment on each other's ideas. So I don't know if that was very clear. I think my jet lag is setting in, Rebecca. Okay, good. And we are right at 9 o'clock, so I don't want to keep people past the time if they have other commitments. But I am still available to answer questions if people have any. No problem, Mark.
So what I'll do is I'll jump on here while people are typing away there. And
Sure.
Mark, yes, you will get a follow-up email tomorrow that has the link to the recording and the resource page that we will post on OTF Connects, which will include all the various links that that have been brought up during tonight's presentation. And so you'll be able to check all those out at your leisure. And I appreciate your patience working through the all the updates that you needed to do. It is a little time consuming for some users. An hour is not unusual. So you're not alone in that. I'll just advance the slide here to our thank you page. So we really do appreciate joining us tonight and participating in Danica's session. I'm sure your wheels are turning about the different possibilities for blogging in your particular classroom. And do come back to us with any other questions and thoughts that come up. You can reply to the email. Danica gave her email and Twitter handle at the beginning, or no, your website and your Twitter handle. So we'll make sure that you get that again as well. I do invite everyone to give us feedback. That's the big orange link in the center of the page. You can click right on it, and that will take you to it as well. I will grab the link and post it in the chat. And it only takes about a minute or two to fill out our feedback form. It's completely anonymous, so do be as complete and as honest as you would like to be. And let us know. This very much shapes our future programming. And you can also register for additional OTF Connect sessions. That's the other link that's at the bottom of the whiteboard screen. We have Nurturing Creativity with Garfield Ginny Newman tomorrow night. So that would be one of our critical thinking sessions, which probably could tie in very nicely to blogging and the different ways that you can get kids thinking out of the box and accessing that creative side of themselves. Next week, we have another really wonderful session with the Reaching Reluctant Learners, and that was a session that we had in the fall that was extremely popular, and lots and lots of people wanted to learn more and continue the discussion. So we have that on Tuesday, and then on Thursday we have financial literacy with the Financial Consumer Association of Canada, and a lot of fantastic free resources there for picking up some of the threads of the financial literacy curriculum that is through basically all subject areas. So we do thank you again for your time. Syria, do you want to say a few closing words?